Welcome to our Zoom event, Zooming with Fred Haise. My name is Stephen Cruthards. I am one of the educators here at Infinity Science Center. I am joined tonight by my coworker and colleague, Ann King, who will be co-host for the event. And it is always an honor to get to talk and see Mr. Haise, and it is especially my honor to introduce him tonight. Now, for many of us, Mr. Haise is a bit of a celebrity. He is the Apollo 13 lunar module pilot. Before that, he was a Marine Corps pilot and a test pilot before joining NASA as part of the 5th astronaut group during the Apollo program. After the Apollo program, he was instrumental in performing the approaching landing test on the Space Shuttle Enterprise as the first commander of that ship. And at this moment, I'm going to turn everything over to Mr. Haise and let him do whatever he plans to do.
In my rocking chair days, I really didn't have a plan when I retired. After I left NASA, I was 17 years with Northrop Grumman in the aerospace business, and had several contracts obviously tied to NASA, although most of my business was with the Defense Department. I ran two service companies, one for Northrop and one for Grumman during that period, which we combined into one company. And I didn't have a plan when I retired in 1996 of what to do. I had a small fishing place here in Mississippi, not over at Goche, which Ann knows where that is. And did some fishing in the Pascagoula River and out in the Gulf a little ways. But I got an offer to join the board very early on, about 16 years ago, of the Infinity Science Center, who's hosting this event tonight. And I've been with it all that time on the board. And in fact, was involved in the early days. We had to raise money. We had a goal of raising $40 million to build it. And we got to 32.5 about, and that's allowed us to put out bids and get the building built. And I was there the day the bulldozers were there clearing the ground. So I've seen it from the hatching up to where it is today, which I'm very proud of. And it services a lot of young children on school field trips. Unfortunately, we've not gotten to 2019 yet, where we had about over 28,000 children from the Gulf Coast of Mississippi to visit the museum. But at any rate, on my career, most of you probably wouldn't have needed that introduction if you're space fans. You knew I flew Apollo 13. I also flew, not flew, but could have flown because I was a backup for, let's see, yep, I was a backup to Bill Anders on Apollo 8. That was my first crew assignment. And I backed up Bill when he went to the moon with Frank Borman and Jim Lovell that Christmas in '68. And then I had another training episode on the backup crew of Apollo 11. I backed up Buzz Aldrin. You have to realize a backup crew and Apollo program, differently than shuttle, trained equally with the prime, which obviously turned out to be a very good thing. On our mission, where we changed out Jack Schweigert for Kim Mattingly 2.5 days before launch. Literally, we could have changed out the entire crew the week of launch, and the mission would have gone on just as planned. So anyway, as a backup, though, he did all the work to go fly, and it was kind of disappointing because then you just got to watch somebody else go fly the mission. But I finally got the chance on 13, and obviously that didn't turn out the way I'd hoped. I didn't get to walk on the moon, which I was planning to do with Jim Lovell. We'd have been number 5 and 6 persons walking on the moon, and but we had a different, I'll call it a different and exciting at times mission that took a lot of work in ingenuity by a larger number of people than were shown in the movie. It's one of the complaints I had to Ron Howard. He didn't show some of them, what I thought should have been more of the important people recognized that led peculiar efforts in solving things for Apollo 13. But he just told me he only got 2 hours in a movie and he can only developed so many characters in that time. So at any rate, I went on to train as the backup on 16. I was a backup commander to John Young, and I had a crew of Jerry Carr and Bill Pogue, who were both from my group, the original 19, which I thought it was great because at the time we got appointed, 18 and 19 were still scheduled to fly. And so on a normal 3-mission cycle, we would have flown Apollo 19. And that's been great because it's been our group, the first time only our group constituted a crew, but Jerry Carr and I would have been 2 Marines on the moon. Unfortunately, as you know from who's landed, no Marine, US Marine, has ever been on the moon. Now, there was a case on Apollo 12 where a fellow was initially designated for the crew and was killed in an airplane crash, and Al Bean replaced him on that crew. So we missed the chance of getting him on the moon, which would have made a Marine on the moon. All the other services were pretty covered. So at any rate, 19, unfortunately, with budget cuts, went away. And I finished that mission as a backup with Ed Mitchell and Stu Russa. They'd gotten off of 14, flying 14, and Deke assigned them with me to finish this, what we thought probably would be a deadhead crew assignment, backup crew assignment. So that's the way that went to finish out that training cycle. I got interested in program management and went to the Harvard Business School for one of these 4-month pressure cooker courses, and came back and went into the Orbiter Project Office and spent 4 years really in program management on the design development of shuttle, the orbiter, at least it was the orbiter office. And so it was I consider really a highlight of my career was to get to fly Enterprise, because this was the first orbiter we built. So it was kind of womb to tomb for me. I'd been there actually as part of the team that evaluated the proposals to pick who would build shuttle, and went from that to the program office work to all the design development to now get to fly that first vehicle for the first time. So that was, I considered a highlight. I went on, continued with NASA, and was going to fly the 3rd orbital flight with Jack Lausma. We were going to go rescue Skylab. And that was going to be a very interesting mission. It'd been first rendezvous. We were going to carry a kick stage in our payload bay that Jack was actually training to fly. There was a simulator Lockheed Martin had built at Colorado. Jack was training on. I flew a few flights on it, but he with a little swizzle stick was going to control the booster and fly it over as we'd be offset to Skylab of several hundred feet, and we released it from the payload bay, and Jack would fly it to dock with Skylab, and we'd actually move away at that time, and mission control would decide how to orient Skylab before firing the booster to either raise it higher in orbit or deorbit it, which I suspected they would have done more safely into the Pacific Ocean. And as it turned out, it fell in on its own, somewhat controlled, and scattered a few parts into Australia, fortunately into desolate areas, so it didn't bother anybody. So that mission went away when that happened, when it fell in early. And that's when I decided I had an opportunity to join Grumman as a vice president, head of space programs. And so I took that opportunity and left NASA in '79. And as I mentioned, I had 17 years in the aerospace business with Grumman. Then we merged with Northrop. And so I had a lot of interesting contracts you wouldn't know about. With Lockheed and Thiokol, I teamed with Grumman. And we turned around shuttles for 12 years. We had the shuttle processing contract at Kennedy Space Center. And when a shuttle landed, we had to do all the processing to get it ready, or whatever next was in line ready to launch. So I had that contract for 12 years. Another one that was interesting in a way, but at the time I was in it, it was a very difficult contract. Was I led the system engineering and integration contract on Space Station Freedom for 4 years. I moved actually to Washington, D.C. to head that program. And the big problem was both internally in NASA with changes they were making, but also with the budgeting. Congress was not supporting that program. And every year, it was almost a concern of whether they're going to make it through to the next year. They're very hard on my recruiting people and holding on to workers, that kind of thing, because of morale problems, literally, with the program at that point. Those of you that buy my book at some point, you'll note that that time of my career, I call my time in purgatory. And that about describes what that was like at the time. The NASA made while I was there, NASA changed in 4 years, NASA went through 3 administrators. They went through 3 heads of the manned space program in the Washington office. And I actually was reporting as a contractor to the head of the NASA office in Reston, and they went through 3 changes. So it was a very unstable NASA also I was dealing with, very unusual for NASA in that time period. So that's what I say, it was was a real tough job I had during that period. But at any rate, I would maybe open it up now and let anybody who's either read the book or, one other thing I mentioned is and I don't know if some of you, but some space hipsters complained my book was too short. So what I'm in the midst of is building a website. And for those that are interested, at least you can get a picture of what the website will look like and contain. Right now, you can go to www.fredhaise, small letters, .space. Space is a new domain. So it's not .com, it's .space. So www.fredhaise.space. And it'll give you the breakdown of the sections it's going to have, which sort of parallels the book in terms of lifespan, but in addition, that each section will have a narrative. In fact, enough narrative across there that you almost have an adjunct to the book. And beyond that, in each section, we'll have an array of pictures. And that's also a problem when you write a book. They limit you how many pictures you can have. So there's pictures available, and then archival data. For instance, under the Astronaut Adventures archival data, you would find a diary I kept for the 1 year, a little over a year, I was at Grumman testing lunar modules, handwritten daily diary. So those kind of things will be in the archival data in that website. So for those that weren't happy with the book, you can read some more and dig some more to your heart's content. But at any rate, I think now I'll open it up for a question. I see Joey, you just joined the late. You might unmute. And where are you at now?
Hi, I'm Joey Fan. I actually live in Huntsville, Alabama. I have supported the Huntsville Army and NASA aerospace community for over 30 years. My background's computer science. I did work on the International Space Station. It was no longer Space Station Freedom by the time I worked on it.
Yeah, the Russians didn't like the word freedom.
Exactly. But been a big fan of the space program for a long time, and a big fan of yours, obviously, for all the work that you've done with the Apollo and the space shuttle program.
Yeah, I had, incidentally, one other contract. I had the contract at Huntsville at Redstone. I had the base support contract.
Okay.
About 700 people, where we maintained the base, and all the water, had two water processing plants in the Tennessee River, and
right.
Lots of power plants to supply all those test sites. So anyway, it was, I'd been to NASA many times, but until I got that contract, I didn't know Redstone that well.
Well, actually, right now, I support the Redstone Test Center as the Army Test Center. We test a lot of Army aviation equipment out there, so very familiar with the test center.
Okay. Now let's see, many questions from the group. I see Laurie.
Hi. When you were in the U.S. Marine Corps, 54 through to about 56, I understand that you flew both the Banshee and the Cougar.
That's correct. I was in 2 squadrons. BMF 533 had the Banshee. And incidentally, the astronaut that was the head of Kennedy Space Center so recently went to Washington. He actually also flew that squad. He was in that squadron, but then Vietnam, and it had switched to A6s by then. So
Okay.
that squadron had the old Banshee made by McDonnell Douglas. And the other squadron, the BMF 114, which has been dissolved, it no longer exists. I had the Grumman F9, F8, the first swept wing airplane. And that was the airplane that first went supersonic. You had to do it in a dive. But that was my first experience to see the Mach meter go above 1.
Wow. What the flight characteristics between the 2 planes must have been fairly different. Did you have a preference between the 2?
Well, for the Marine Corps mission, which is basically ground support, that's their primary mission, the Banshee was much better for that role. We had, I think, about 6 racks under the wing, so we could carry a load of bombs or rockets or whatever. And the F9, F8 Cougar didn't quite have that capability. In fact, that's a problem right now, I think, with the F-35 that bought, they got a V-stall version for the Marine Corps. But it's a very expensive airplane. They really should have a advanced with a little more armament on it, even A-10 type aircraft for the Marine Corps. Because when you're doing ground support, you're down low, so you're even getting hit by small arm fire pretty routinely. And that stealth aircraft didn't need it very much.
That's very true.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I say Ginny's got her hand up.
Yes,
Anybody
well,
else?
first of all, I would just like to tell you how big of a moment this is for me. I've been obsessed with the Apollo program since I was 6 years old, before I even knew how to speak English. And if I'd be able to tell my 12-year-old self that I would be talking to the Fred Haise, I would not have believed myself. This is such an honor. Thank you. And then my question is, or rather, yeah, the question. My father and I are currently writing a book about the Apollo program. We're writing it in Norwegian and also having it translated to English, but the goal is to reach a Scandinavian audience. And we're writing about lessons that can be learned from each Apollo mission. And my question to you is, what lessons from your time as a backup that you think are important to convey to people? And if I'm not mistaken, I believe you are the only person from Group 5 who was ever a backup during the Apollo missions, so before 17. So I really just want to hear what lessons you think it learned as a backup that you think are important.
Well, first of all, to correct you on that, Ed Mitchell actually was the first one assigned to a backup slot, but he was on Apollo 10.
Yeah, I meant as a commander, backup commander.
Oh, sorry, I was the only one ever named as a commander during Apollo. But the lessons learned in Apollo, I guess what you're thinking of kind of relating to Artemis, probably the bigger lessons they have and deal with, and it's a challenge, are really more related to space station. They have three launch vehicles going to be in, 2 launch vehicles will be involved, but SpaceX I think is going to do 2 launches, and the big NASA booster 1. Then they have these other things that they get up there and in orbit around the moon that are never going to mate till they're at the moon. it's kind of like what you had to deal with that in space station, which was one of my big concerns when I had that integration job, was to make sure these documents called ICDs, interface control documents, were very, very accurate. Because unlike Apollo, where we actually mated a LEM and a command module at Kennedy before launch every time, we actually docked them, had the LEM upside down and docked with the command module. And space station, the things that arrived at all different kind of schedules to arrive at Kennedy. So the first time they were going to mate was in orbit when shuttle brought it up. So always worried that something was going to get up there and it wasn't going to fit, or the connectors for the electrical connectors, or the plumbing for cooling the flow, and that whatever, that would not match up. Now that would be an easier problem though, even though you might have to leave it there coasting in flight with leave the shuttle because it couldn't stay up there very long. But you could come back with another shuttle and try to figure out how to rectify the situation. But here, the first time some of these things on Artemis are going to see each other is in lunar orbit. So that's a little further away to have to worry about going on a maintenance job to try to solve the problem. So they're going to be even more critical in paying attention to their ICDs and making sure everything's compatible when they get together up there. So that's a space station challenges that way applied directly to what they really need to work hard and be concerned about. And it's also the same way as space station. It's different players. It's not just US. The European Space Agency has a piece of the action. And so it's different players involved that you also internationally have to coordinate. Now, the thing, I guess you talk about the systems, it really doesn't apply too much. You're thinking about Apollo 13 and our failure. The redundancy levels, I would hope, would be above 2. Basically, we flew Apollo with a system A and a system B, system 1, system 2. And I'd hope you'd at least have triplets. And what this like on shuttle, actually, for most things, we had 4. IMUs, they had 3. That was sort of an oddball. That it really was a geometry problem. We couldn't fit 4. So that was backed into 3 there. But otherwise, we had 4s of things. And the thought there was really you could have 1 failure, and with 3 left, you could go just continue the mission and normally. But you'd like to have triplets on system components, and I hope they at least go to that for the lunar occasion.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I did pull up your website and I put the link in the chat room if anybody wants to click on it. Would you like me to share the screen and you can kind of show us what it's like? Tell me which way to go.
Okay, I don't know if you can put it up, Steve.
I can do it.
Oh, okay.
James
You've
should
got
be able
me.
to do it.
Yep, there it is.
Not seeing anything on mine yet. Okay, now I got it. All right,
Got it?
there we are. Yep.
Okay, so this is the first page, and with just some neat picture and it's sort of a promise we're launching, actually plan to launch. I'm working this with Lauren Jern. I don't know if any of you know the name. He's a space hipster, runs a software business. And I ran into him obviously through Space Hipsters, but he also had worked the website for Tim Gagnon, who did a lot of the shuttle emblems, the patches for shuttle astronauts in their flights. So Tim had wanted a new website, and Tim, he had been worked with Logan to do that, and I liked what I saw, so I got enlisted Logan to help me with this. But if you move on across, it goes into the different segments. If you move to the right there, up there,
Okay.
I got a growing up section, and here I just got a very short narrative to sort of explain that area. The real narrative I have finished. that will be in it is 8.5 pages at 12-point type. So if we go
Oh,
on,
wow.
growing up is once, and they'll have now this one will be short on pictures and archives because of my growing up time was a long time ago. I was born in 1933. My family only had a box Kodak camera, and they didn't take many pictures. Most time for family picture of sorts, you went to a studio, photography studio, and got that done. And archival data, and pictures are short because my sister in Biloxi, Mississippi, who had most of them, got 8.5 foot of water in her house during Katrina hurricane. And that unfortunately wiped out a lot of the family pictures. But if you move on across the arrow to the right, the next one is military experience. And this will cover primarily my flight training segment and Naval Aviation Command flight training, to the little touch on the 2 Marine Squadron experience, and then so that's pretty much what that is. It has, the pictures will be mostly airplanes. Offhand, I think of the only archival thing I can think of right now that's in it. I did had copied, and it's enclosed as the handbook, the pilot handbook for the F-6F aircraft. And the main point of that was for those that look at it, and unfortunately, those who don't fly won't think of it as meager, but I point out that today, if you went to a modern airplane, the classified section of the handbook would be bigger than that total handbook to fly the F-6F. So things have gotten more complicated. That's the point. But anyway, move on across quickly. The next one is back to school. This is where I hit the end of my time with the Marine Corps and decided I want to be a test pilot. So this is my brief time at the University of Oklahoma. In some experiences there, I joined the Air National Guard, flying the P-80s, which was the very first operational jet the country had. But we did upgrade in 1958 to the F-86 Saberjet, which was the fighter that was flown, and primarily the one in Korean War against the MiG. And so that's pretty much what that section's about in that time frame. And that's where I got a degree in aeronautical engineering and thought of what I wanted to do with that. And I wanted to be a test pilot, and I looked at companies, but my squadron commander convinced me I should join NACA. When I was thinking about that in 1957, it had not become NASA yet. But by the time I applied in 59 to various NASA centers, it had become NASA and was picked up. And the next arrow to the right will take you to my NASA research pilot days, where I started at Lewis Research Center. And I was involved with Jack Enders in developing the second zero-G program in this country. The Air Force had the first one initially at White Sands, and then they moved it to Wright-Patterson in Ohio. Testing human subjects was their mission. And our mission at Lewis was testing fluid systems, like the fluid system for the SNAP-8 nuclear power generator that flew on some satellite programs early on, the nuclear power source. And we designed the screens for the Centaur rocket in zero-G flights. So that was the second zero-G program in the country. And incidentally, I joined Lewis Research Center initially in Cleveland, 3 years behind Neil Armstrong. That's where Neil started with NASA as a research pilot. Then he moved on to Edwards, and then click the next arrow to the right, and that'll take you, that covers this, incidentally, this period also at Flight Research Center. And also in the previous section there, covers both NASA centers I was at as a test pilot. And then I go into Astronaut Adventures. Now this one is has the most volume, not totally in narrative, but quite a bit of narrative. I think maybe 10 plus pages or more. And lots and lots of pictures, many of which you could find probably on NASA websites. but kind of covers the era I had in the astronaut period. But some probably you wouldn't have found, and an incredible amount of archival data will be in this within this section. So going across, the next arrow is Aerospace Executive Day. So that's my time with Grumman and Northrop Grumman. And again, here, there's not too many pictures and not a huge amount of archival data, but a fair amount of narrative. This is where, out of this area, when I was working with Smithsonian Press, they had me cut over 50 pages down to 20 pages in the book. So they thought that would be too interesting to people. So anyway, this has a fairly large narrative area. And the next click across will be rocking chair days, which is where I am now. And it'll talk to the kinds of things I've gotten into in retirement. Again, lots of pictures and not too much archival data here. So anyway, that's what the website carries. Brain blurbs I left as an opening to insert things here, that things in my old age I just think of out of the blue. Because as you find out, any of you, as you get older all at once, you remember something from 40 years ago, clear as a bell, and with great detail that comes to mind. And that may be pertinent. I mean, I wouldn't just put anything there, but I think may be pertinent. Space hipsters might be interested in. I'll insert it here occasionally. That's it.
Okay. And again, the link is in chat, and you said it was www.fredhaise.space.
Yep. And hopefully it's been a tougher job than I thought. It's mainly cataloging the pictures, and making the right explanations with pictures has been the toughest part of the creation so far. So, and we took on Aerospace Adventures first because we knew it was the biggest. And so we're pretty much have finished that now. So I think I'll move quicker. So we will have it fully populated and ready to put out there by the end of August. I see another question.
Rory had the question.
Comment and a question. I grew up during the late 50s into the 60s, 70s. So I lived the Mercury, Gemini, Apollo missions. And I used to, camp out in my parents' living room in front of the black and white television and watch missions, and had sleeping bags overnight so that I could stay up and watch moonwalks and follow along with all the missions. So it just means so much to me to be able to talk to you, Fred, and thank you, Infinity Science Center, for this opportunity. This is just, I hate to say it's cliche, but I'm over the moon. I truly am. My question to the Enterprise, which I had the great fortune, my husband and I, to be able to visit the Enterprise when she flew in on the 747 carrier into Ottawa and make a visit here. So the fact that you flew her, I believe it was three landing, approach and landing tests that you did as commander on the Enterprise. Is that correct?
What was the last part?
It was three landing and approach
Right.
tests that you did with the Enterprise. That's
Right.
correct, is it?
Yeah, we flew an 8-flight test program, and 3 of them were captive, where we did not separate. And we did some system tests on those flights. And then we also perfected the launch profile to get us to a safe point that we could separate and think would be clear when we separated before we made the first release. And then I flew 3 of the 5 flights where we released it. from the 747. We had those were pretty short flights. Ricardo Fullerton quipped after our first flight, I think, which was 5 minutes and 21 seconds, something like that. And he said, "This is not a good program to build up flight time." And so at any rate, we had certain maneuvers to do, and with different varying center gravities. They had put weight ballast in the payload bay that we could shift the center of gravity, and certain maneuvers to do both manually in terms of the stick inputs to excite dynamics, but also through the computer. We had a fixed program in the computer. By calling it up and punching pro, it would wiggle the controls same way to excite dynamics. It's mainly to provide the data to verify the aerodynamic coefficients relative to the wind tunnel data they had. So obviously there was a little bit of testing on the landing itself. I was really not ever worried about the whether the vehicle could land or not. That you could pull out of what most people thought was a brick descent. It really wasn't. The orbiter, even tail cone off, it was approximately 4.5. So it was like the X-15, which, as you know, flew many flights. And I flew lifting bodies. I actually flew a lightweight lifting body at Edwards that was much worse. It had no wings, just the body shape, much lower L over D. And we flew a test program with an F5D where we doubled the speed brake area, beefed up the landing gear, attached struts to the doors, landing gear doors, so we could fly the landing gear down to 300 knots. And it had a switch. We could pop open the nozzles on the afterburners that gave us 600 pounds reverse thrust. And with the F5D, we worked our way slowly down to an L over D of 1. In other words, a 45-degree dive toward the ground and pull out and land using just basic aircraft instruments. So I wasn't worried too much about the shuttle, handling the shuttle for actually pulling out and affecting the landing. The main concerns were, would the gear come down the first time? Second time, we're going to have the gear down with some aerodynamics. And of course, brakes. And we eventually got to test, and we found problems with our anti-skid. But of course, we had a very long lake bed to deal with. So 8-mile long runway on that Rogers Dry Lake. So that was pretty safe to even handle that. The biggest concern I had approaching the first time was actually that separation. Not that we didn't have it figured out. It was cocked. We were cocked up. That forward stanchion attaching us was longer than the later ones when they flew it just cross country back to Kennedy. And that we were actually given the 747 lift. So basically, when I cut it free, I knew I was dropping the 747, basically. It lost lift. In fact, Fitz said he needed about 60 pounds, but 56 pounds on the yoke to not have it start to dive too steeply after we cut it loose. I was mainly worried about stability of the primary control system. We had gained it highly to have a pilot rating handling qualities of about 1 or 2 through all the engineering sims and development we've done. And there's always a chance that if you miss the dynamics from all the wind tunnel data, the system could go out of control. You have the controls flailing wildly. It happens sometimes on airplanes that have flight control instability. And I worried about, obviously, in that case, switching fast enough to a backup system, which I could do with one button, which we had deliberately flown about 500 runs at Ames Research Center with a number of us flying, that number of subjects, to de-gain that system and also coded by a different software vendor, Draper versus IBM, and to make it a little sloppier flying, but about a 4 to 5 pilot rating, that we knew you could get it on the ground and control it. And the concern safety-wise actually was not Gordo and I. We were sitting in ejection seats, so we had a we had a plan B, so to speak. I was worried about Fitz. There was 4 people on the 747, Fitz Bolton, Tom McMurtry, Vic Horton, and Skip Guidry, who all knew very well. And if we had hit the 747 to damage it severely, they could not have escaped. So that they were the crew that took the high risk at our first separation. So I was just praying that the control system worked good, which it did.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Jenny has a question. Jenny?
Yeah, sorry, my computer just
Okay.
shorted for a bit.
I hear you.
Yes, I also have a comment and a question. I was unfortunately born in the wrong decade. I was even born in the wrong century. So I've had to do with the testaments and the stories of the space age. And that is, in fact, the reason why I'm studying history. So thank you very much for your book and for the website. It's vital to keep the stories of the Apollo age alive. And this is just, it's pure gold for any space geek. My question is about Jack Swigert. I am very fascinated by Jack. I guess you could say he still works his charm even 50 years later. And I've read many books and biographies, and I'm currently working my way through your book and Al Warden's Falling to Earth. And of course, you hear all about him being the bachelor and the womanizer. But he died very early and never really got to tell his own story. So I'm sure there's more to him than what people think. So I guess what my question is, what was he really like?
Okay.
Besides what you read in the books.
Yeah, you know, at the time, both Ken and Jack were both bachelors. Now they were of total different characters. Now Ken was, I say, more to the introverted side. He was an extremely he and Gardner Fullerton were the 2 guys, and I was happy to have worked with, that were guys that were steeped in studying and looking at details. Very meticulous that way. But introverted. Like I lived with Ken 6 weeks when I joined the astronaut program and moved to Houston before I could move my family. And Ken snacked on cheese and crackers and didn't sleep much at night. I mean, not because he couldn't sleep, he just didn't sleep needle of hours, and just worked and worked and worked. I mean, he was that kind of a guy. And but the kind of guy that, even though he didn't outwardly seem talkative or whatever, wanting to meet people, if you ever got him to talking in a group or on stage, for instance, he was great. Jack, on the other hand, was a lot more outgoing, and not quite. We kidded him a lot on a lot of our events about being the ladies' man and being the bachelor. And one of the big disappointments for Jack was getting put in the mission so late. He didn't get to have his 5 girlfriends there for the launch, you know. But he wasn't that way either. Jack was a bigger, heavier guy. He was a guard, actually, played football. And he was a guard for the University of Colorado, playing football. So he always wore white socks, except for tuxedos. I think on tuxedo days, he wouldn't wear his white socks. But he was very outgoing. I mean, extremely outgoing. He had an apartment. We would stage wine party. We got into the thing of within our astronaut group of making wine. It was kind of like a contest, who could make the best wine, and Jack would be the host at his apartment for these wine tasting parties. So that was Jack. He was just extremely outgoing. He was great to be with on our world tour. And I say a world tour, it was a quarter of the world tour or less, but at all the social events and things. Like and where was we were in Greece. In fact, we were the first US official entourage to visit Greece when Papadopoulos had taken over the country, the colonel, and it kicked the royals out. We were the first official recognized US group to visit. And they had one event where they were doing these Greek dancings, which were very tough, where they, in uniforms and everything, and they were crouching and kicking their feet, kind of like the Russians do a similar dance. Jack got out there and with them and was dancing, for instance. There's no way you would have got me out there, make a fool of myself, but that was Jack. Anyway, it was a great guy to be around. And it was a kind of I thought the movie, I think, did a bad thing for Jack. The movie gave you a feeling that we worried Jack couldn't perform what he had to do on the mission. And that, I've told you before, the backup is trained equally with the prime. In fact, I assure you, I could have replaced anybody I backed up and done as good a job. So there wasn't anything that way with Jack being. Now we did have Jack, and we went in the simulators till about 8 o'clock the night before launch. We wanted to go through dynamic phases, in particular like rendezvous, and make sure as we express things in the normal, what you call the normal back and forth during that kind of coordinated maneuvers, that we spoke the same language, that the backup crew had somehow, even though we're using the same books, same checklist, they hadn't devised a different way of expressing something. So we did it more from that aspect rather than worrying Jack couldn't follow the book and hadn't been trained to follow the book. So anyway, that's my story a little bit on Jack.
That's lovely. Thank
Joey
you
has a
very much.
question. Oh, sorry.
Joey, you had a question?
Yes, Mr. Haise, in addition to Apollo 13, you were also associated with my other favorite mission, Apollo 8, and you were just talking about the backups and I guess being back up to Bill Anders. My question has to do with what was the thought or the mood in the program at the time, because you know, when they decided to take Apollo 8 around the moon, we hadn't even flown Apollo 7 yet. And, you know, of course, they had to wait until to see how Apollo 7 went. But can you just tell us a little bit about what you guys were thinking, what the attitudes were that, hey, you're going to ride the Saturn V for the first time, and on the second Apollo, you know, command module mission, you're going to fly it around the moon without a lunar module, which turned out in your later mission to be a very critical lifeboat. Just comment on the risk and just the attitude that, hey, we can really do this. What was the feeling back around the time of Apollo 8? Well,
it obviously was a big risk, a big jump. And actually it didn't happen before. We were in training. I was in training as the backup interesting lunar module pilot on a mission that didn't have a lunar module, Apollo 8. In fact, I'd never been in the command module.
Oh, wow.
When I joined that crew, I'd never been in the command module. I'd spent all my time on the lunar module, living at Grumman, and even following it to the Cape to get LEM 3 ready thought to be ready to launch. But so I had that was the hardest mission for me to get ready for. I had to learn a new vehicle before that mission. Now we trained for those about 6 weeks before that was announced that we'd go to the moon. Now Lowe had been thinking about it, George Lowe, in the background, and I think it had talks with Gilruth, Dr. Gilruth, who was head of Johnson Space Center, Manned Spacecraft Center at the time, and with Chris Kraft, worrying about the mission control getting up to speed to do that. And so they had it in the back of their minds, and as you said, they wanted to sort of the final test was, how did Apollo 7 go? Did the capsule check out adequately in that Earth orbital flight, which was a very thorough test program run during that flight. In the book and maybe in the archival data, I have a memo that covers a meeting. A meeting was held at the Cape, and Charlie Mars, one of the system engineers at Kennedy, briefed LEM 3 status and the open items on that vehicle. In other words, that we're keeping it from being ready to go. And George Lowe even stepped in and added some more. And it was mainly because they had the headquarters people there. They had Dr. Mueller, And they had Sam Phillips, the former general, Air Force general, was also in that meeting from NASA headquarters. So they wanted to convince them as well that LIM 3 wasn't going to make it, basically. That the only way to try to hold schedule from the program standpoint was to move ahead with Apollo 8 making the journey to the moon first, while the LIM continued to try to get ready. So that was what was going on at that time. And I say it was a sad meeting for Joe Gavin. He was there. He was a LIM program manager, because there was a lot of negativism going on about the shape LIM was in at that time. Most vehicles, though, it wasn't just Mercury, Gemini. Very few vehicles were ever shipped completely, truly finished with all the flight articles that it was going to fly aboard when they got shipped to the Cape. They generally were in some form of a basket case, if you will, that had to get finished with the installation of things that were going to fly and then tested.
I have a question, if that's okay. I was wondering, unfortunately, Jack Swigert passed away in 1982. But I was wondering, were you and Jim Lovell, did y'all remain close after the mission?
Did we have what after the mission?
Were you still friends, and were you still, close to?
Oh, yeah. No, Jack, all the way through, he went to, eventually ended up running for Congress, as you know, and made it. Unfortunately, he lost one election and ran again and won, and unfortunately died 6 days before he was to be sworn in, which they did posthumously. But no, I kept Jack worked for Tiger T. Tiger T ran one of the, from Texas. He ran one of the major committees NASA had to deal with through the budget cycle. And Jack worked for Tiger, kind of running the staff, really preparing for the reviews. And at the time, that's when I was working for Grumman. So obviously, as contractors do, that are interested in government business, I spent my share of time on the Hill lobbying in one way or another to try to keep programs alive, to get funding. And so I met with Jack a lot during that period in Washington, particularly on the space station. Like I said, when I was there, a lot of 4 years. So no, I kept in touch with Jack even as we both left the program. There's others that stayed in aerospace. Pete Conrad worked for McDonnell Douglas. Jim McDivitt worked for Rockwell Corporation. So I got to meet those people regularly at different affairs that we all got together and tried to keep our friendships with the right people, with the right influence to keep our business running.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
I was going to
Looks
say
like
one
Joey has a
thing.
question.
One of the craziness of the whole COVID is that it has brought Zoom and virtual visits and doing things via the computer as opposed to a person, which gives people from all over the world the opportunity to come in and see, but also the fact that you've been Zooming in with all of our Astro campers. You have no idea how excited they are and absolutely thrilled. And not just the kids, but a lot of the teachers as well. That's one of their highlights of the camp experience.
Yeah, and you're right. It's been I use Skype a lot over the years. I've talked to schools, classrooms, to Australia. I had 2 events to Perth along the way. And so I've talked internationally with Skype, but you're limited as to how many players you can have with Skype. So Zoom has been a great opening that way. I talked to teacher groups for 4 years. Each year they have a week-long thing at Johnson for teachers. I think it's longer than a week and a half maybe, science and math teachers. And next month I have one coming up with high school interns that are tied with the Johnson's Space
Well, I
Center.
think our mutual friend Becky Fritchie is at that right now. She's working with some interns.
Right. Yeah, it's a great resource. to avoid travel, obviously. And as you said, when we were cloistered in our home shells during COVID, as a way to keep a little bit in touch with the outside world. Yeah.
Okay.
I think Joey might have had another question.
Yeah, I did have one more question. Mr. Haise, I haven't read your book, but I did receive it from the Smithsonian just a few days ago, so I'm looking forward to reading it. I do have a software background, and I do know in some of your Enterprise landing tests, in one particular test, there was oscillation issues with the orbiter at Porpoise on the landing. And I just guess, from a software point of view, can you talk a little bit about what was happening there and what the group did to go ahead and fix it and make sure for the operational shuttles that didn't happen again?
Right. And incidentally, you'll find a lot of good archival data on that subject also in the website when it gets out there.
Okay.
But basically, I encountered what you would call a PIO, pilot-induced oscillation. The fifth, last free flight test was to land on a runway and to land on a specific stripe that had been painted across the runway at Edwards, the hard runway, which counting the overruns was really about a 12,000-foot runway. So anyway, I got to pulsing the pitch control too much trying to make the spot. I ended up fast with more speed than I wanted coming out of the rotation. I was trying to kill off speed and to get down and hit the spot. So as it turned out, I missed the stripe by about 1,000 feet where my first touchdown was. And the vehicle skipped back into the air slightly and it was rolling. It had a roll to the right. And I tried to put in a roll input to catch the wing from tipping on over. And I got no input. I mean, no response. Like I didn't have control. And I made a second input and still no response. And the third input, I got a lot of response. And that put me into a back and forth wing walk for a little bit, which was the PIO. What had happened was I over controlled and pitch trying to hit that stripe and had saturated the control system, the hydraulics. So unfortunately, one of the changes we made going forward was we changed the software to assure that no one axis would ever be locked out. And that's basically what happened. Pitch had it all basically, and it took away anything from roll. So we actually had a down selecting scheme where I think speed brake got maybe body flap would get least, speed brake would get next, and the elevons in all cases would split whatever was left short of rate limiting. So that was some of the changes made to not that ever occurred again to deal with it.
Okay.
So it's kind of an embarrassment because Prince Charles was there to view this landing and about several thousand spectators, and to bounce and have that wing waggle, miss the spot, and actually had a comparatively to all landings, a hard landing about 5 feet per second. The airplane was spec'd at about 10 feet per second.
Yeah.
And the landing gear people at some of the debriefings afterwards tried to make me feel better, saying they were very happy with the landing because that's the first time they got good data.
Right, exactly.
On their landing gear and oleo stroking.
Yeah, I guess just a follow-up question, just from a personal perspective. I know you said, you were originally scheduled to make the third flight for the Skylab saving mission with Jack Lousma, and then you decided to move on, to Grumman and the management. Did you ever have any second thoughts after the shuttle started flying that, like, hey, I wish I would have stuck around to fly? Into space.
Not really. See, the mission it was going to fly was Jack did, and Gordo got Gordo an earlier flight. I was happy. They went up primarily to collect thermal data. We had put an enormous amount of thermocouples on Columbia, And so they were to sit around in orbit in various attitudes to collect thermal data. And I was not interested in the view. A lot of people can't understand that, but see, I'd be bored on space station.
Right.
And I'm not interested in Mars that much because it's the software has gotten to where there's not much piloting anymore. And I'm a
Exactly.
pilot.
Yep.
And so I'm interested in trying out new things and doing things different and seeing how they work.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
So, you know, a space station is great for scientists, that particularly if they have some vested interest in an experiment that's gonna, they perform and handle and manage and collect data. But for me, you know, it's fun to look out the window for about a day, but not for 6 months. So, you know, I'm a different vintage, I guess, in that respect, as a test pilot.
Do you think it has changed how astronauts are from the early days where it was mostly test pilots and flight engineers to now where it is more scientists and more of a team?
Right. Well, I think take like Artemis, I think there will always be a pilot to handle aborts, to handle takeover and docking, to take certainly in the moon, particularly the first landings they do, until they get a moon base and a fixed concrete landing site. I think there'll always be a pilot, because as we saw on 6 landings on the moon, all were done manually because where the computer wanted to take you to land wasn't suitable. Because we never had the definition of what's really there on the ground in terms of size of rocks and boulders and things, or even small craters. So the pilot had to take over and move a little bit to find a safe place to land. So I think that'll still be true on Artemis for their first initial landings. You know, if you ever get, like I said, a permanent operating moon base and you got a nice, I don't know if it's concrete, but what you'll develop on the moon, but nice same spot, then it'll probably be fully automated, except again in takeover case. Where something failed in the systems that required you to take over to be automated landings. So same way at Mars, and I think we'll change at Mars and probably incidentally with moon base. As I saw, and I recently, I would say recently, about 3 months ago, I had a Zoom with the group in Antarctica at our Antarctica station. And a lot of people there are there to keep things running. And they will be that kind of a person, the handyman, so to speak, particularly on a Mars mission. You know, it's 8 months out, 8 months back, something of that order, and any stay time, you're going to need somebody that's capable of fixing things. And so the handyman talent will be certainly at least one of the crew will have to be of that variety and those kind of missions.
Lori had a question.
The Apollo 13 launch, Saturn V rocket, which I would dearly have loved to actually seen a live launch. But what was your impression of the kick from that, yeah, of the launch itself?
Yeah, the Saturn V was a liquid system, all the engines. It had a lot of push, 7.5 million pounds, 5 engines. But the vehicle weighed a lot too. It was over 6 million pounds. So it didn't have a great thrust to weight differential. So the initial liftoff itself was, I would say, less than I've had on, I've flown the F-106, F-104s, F-101. Even though that vintage airplane, if you kicked it in the afterburner to start down the runway, you had just as much, if not a little more, kick in the pants in the airplane. So it moved away slowly. In fact, I talked to some people that flown Soyuz, and they said if you didn't see the clock start, you wouldn't know you'd lifted off on Soyuz. But shuttle was different. It had those solids, and that was a bigger kick, and they did feel more of acceleration as they came off the pad. But what was most noticeable from an airplane experience was the amount of shaking. particularly the rocking sideways. Our couches were hung from the ceiling on rods that gave us some shock absorbing vertically, and that was made in case we ever had to land on land. It was another provision that helped you survive better if you landed on land. But so they had a little clearance on each side of the couches where they were hung. So it had some motion, it could move a little bit before it hit the hole on the side, the couches. And you got a lot of that back and forth. Those big engines, even though they moved only very little, that was a lot of thrust movement when those 4 other engines gimbaled. And so it was a very shaky ride. Some astronauts have described it as being a train that came off the tracks. I don't know if it's quite that extreme, but it was certainly much rougher that way than any airplane experience. I experienced more airplane experience rough vertically up and down, as all of you have probably riding on an airliner. But where I was doing special weapons training to drop an atomic weapon, and the final run in you make is full blower, and I was flying 84F, almost up to 600 miles an hour, going in at 500 feet into the target to pull up and drop the weapon as it went up. On a hot summer day, I'd come back on some days and have slight lacerations in my shoulder area from the shoulder straps. I'm getting beat around so much on those kind of runs. But the rocket ride, LSG-wise, got to 4.5. They shut down the center engine early to not exceed 4.5. And on airplane fighters I flew, they routinely were cleared for 7.33 Gs, over 7 Gs. Modern fighters are 9 Gs. So 4.5 wasn't that big a deal compared to combat maneuvering in airplanes. The second and third stages were very smooth with the liquids. Now on our second stage, we did several pogo. So we had a very brief period, only seconds really, of vibration, where there was a fluid instability in the feed that eventually shut down and automatically shut down the center engine of our 5 on the second stage. Now I talked to Dick Smith. I don't know if you know Dick, you sure do, probably do, Joey, from Huntsville days, and went to Kennedy and headed Kennedy. I talked to him about that. I think he was a Saturn V manager at the time. He said if that engine had not shut down and had gone only a few more cycles, it probably would have fractured the cruciform structure in the second stage that held that engine. And we'd have had a big boom right there with the second stage. So we were lucky in that the automated system in the IU instrument unit for the booster did that shutdown on that engine. But otherwise, the ride was smooth. The G levels didn't get very high for that in the single engine J2 engine on the third stage. The hot rod was the Titan. It got up to 7 Gs on launch. People that flew Gemini said that 7 Gs was would be something you remember.
I'll bet. Wow, thank you very much.
But no, I think that the people that I'm guessing were I would say shocked, but were most impressed were those that rode shuttle that probably had never, some of them never flown anything except an airliner. And then I think they gave them some 0G rides in the KC-135 probably. I don't know, maybe they took them up on the T-38, I don't know, but many of those people, you know, the mission specialist types were pretty novices as far as flying airplanes. And so riding a shuttle would have been a pretty profound ride for them. And for these people that are paying and riding right now on the Blue Horizon. And I've talked to the crew, incidentally, that flew Dragon, one of the crews. And they do have abort capability, but that's about the only capability they had to fly the vehicle. But basically, I was told they have abort capability from anywhere and the trajectory upward. So they're safe, if you want to call it in that sense. The ride, they said, there's quite a bit of vibration going on that when they get down to single engine on up. But other than that, it said it's a smooth ride all the way, and kind of scared me looking at the concept when they only got a glass screen and they got to do touch on rather than switches but actually the board handle is between the two in the front, and it's actually a physical hard handle to grab and pull if you need to do the abort sequence, rather than have to use a touch screen if you're out of control and swirling around. Yeah.
Yeah, so you talked about SpaceX there for a moment. What do you think of the all private missions that went up last year?
What
The
I'm
Inspiration
sorry,
4.
what?
What do you think about the all private crews that went up earlier last year, and I want to say Axiom was earlier this year as well?
You talking about Dragon now?
Yeah, the Dragon, where they had the all private crews. Axiom 1 went to the station.
Well, it's assumed that when I say pull the handle, I think the abort sequence is all automated too. So if you can pull a handle, I guess you're trained well enough. So that's all built into the software for the targeting that would handle what splashdown, handle the shoot deployments. I don't know. I really don't know if on touch screen you would have any overrides on any of that.
Yeah. Yeah, we were talking to our campers today because we're doing our robotics camp, and we're talking about SpaceX has automated docking software for the crew, for the cargo dragons at least.
I'm sorry?
SpaceX has the automated software for docking for the cargo dragons.
Right.
So I'm assuming there's a lot more that's automated on those.
Well, it's all I can say is it's working. SpaceX has been very highly successful. It made an incredible number of launches. I have somebody that's, I guess, hooked in now to their Starlight or whatever it is system up there, and they said its performance is great with the system. There, I guess they're on like a beta test or whatever, maybe that kind of thing. But they said it's for the up down megabytes or gigabytes you can transmit. It's get back and forth. It's great. So he'll probably make a success of that before he's done too. Yeah.
Looks like Joey had his hand up.
Yeah, I just had another question. Being that I'm in Huntsville, I've lived here for several years. Was just wondering if you could speak a little bit about the Apollo program and working with Dr. Werner von Braun, and specifically some of the ideas he had, such as, the lunar rover, how that came about, and some of the visionary things that he had with regard to what we could do on the moon. And I think his real desire was to go to Mars, but did you have any interactions with him that you remember or remember, during that time here in Huntsville?
Not many, probably
Okay.
Frank Borman and Stu Russo and Charlie Duke were assigned when we got our collateral duties out of our original 19 group. I know Charlie and Stu got tied to the Saturn program and spent a lot of time at Huntsville. Frank Borman, I guess, was a key older astronaut that was also involved with the Saturn V development. I only met Werner at several social events, both during the program and afterwards. When I went back for events at Huntsville afterwards, I was only aware of his vision beyond. Of course, I was directly involved, incidentally, in Apollo 16 with the rover. It's part of the training. So I learned to operate the rover, which obviously was a great asset to enable covering a lot more distance than just walking around on the moon. And but I was his vision further, other than the bigger engine. I know he was planning to upgrade the F1, and knew, of course, of his hopes of going to Mars. But no, other than that, I never had any personal conversation. I never was really in meetings, technical meetings with Werner. But I'm sure Charlie and Stu were, and could lend more to that, answer your question. But no, he was clearly a visionary, and I hated to see him when they moved him to headquarters. Because as you know, in NASA, the action is at the centers.
Exactly.
Right. That's why most center people hate to go to headquarters. And it's an important job. The important job is to get the money and to feed the committees and work the NASA budget to make sure you get, because without the money, you're not going to do much.
Right.
So,
I guess as a follow-up to that, talking about the money, Frank Borman, who you mentioned, when he talks about the program, he specifically says, hey, we did Apollo because we were going to beat the Russians. That's why we did. And do you see that, now with the commercial companies, do we have the vision? Do we have the reason to go to the moon and go to Mars? Do you see that picking up again?
the vision is there. It's still SpaceX can't do it all by themselves. I wish they could. But you still got to worry about the government funding side, and I really worry we're coming up to the midterms, and they keep talking about just because of the other politics, there'll be an enormous change, and who's namely who's going to be in those committees, both the subcommittee and the higher. I'm talking on the House side, subcommittee and the higher committee NASA has to go through. You'll have all these changed faces and people. And unfortunately, as you know, in our Congress, there's not a great abundance of engineers. In fact, I think there's only 1 or 2 engineers in all of Congress and the Senate. So they have great difficulty grasping technical. And so NASA will have to go through another education program with all those new faces on those committees to even hang on to continued funding is planned for Artemis. So that's to me a concern right now facing NASA and the coming midterm elections.
Do you think that the Webb telescope might give it a little boost just because it is a success story and it's working well?
It is to a degree, but some of these people that come in Congress, they look at their livelihood as they're lawyers. Some are fewer businessmen, a few are a doctor or two, but there's no one, I think that's what I call a good space hipster. I shouldn't say no one, very few are good space hipsters.
Miss John Glenn.
Yeah, but so you face that problem. You have to do some selling to say, because they'll say, I've had that when I was earlier fighting things like space station. They said, why have you got to go do that now? I mean, now, you can still go to orbit 20 years from now. Why? Or the same way I've heard people get kicked back at them, why go to Mars? You go to Mars in 100 years from now. So there's no feeling of urgency like Apollo had. Apollo had that sense of urgency, unfortunately, from a pseudo political reason, but nevertheless, we'll take whatever we can get. So you'd like to have that somehow that driven that way. Unfortunately, I think things I think of that may not in a different way spark the interest is when that meteor hits somewhere, which it's going to hit, is the guaranteed, just a question of when. And that'll awaken the world to worrying about, do we really need to keep up on the step on being able to do things in space. Incidentally, the last chapter in my book, how many of you have out there have read the book? Any of you online right now read the book?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you notice the last chapter, I worried about painting a negative picture, but I talked to 3 global threats. One being what I just mentioned, the meteorite, asteroids, and even these interlopers. Now we've cited 2 interlopers that come through our solar system. We don't even know where they came from. So, you know, we're tracking the pieces, the bigger pieces anyway, of asteroids, and even got a mission to get them down. I forget to what centimeters the size. So we're keeping track of them anyway, but we still don't have a exact way to go fix the problem if we saw one going to hit us. The other one was global warming, and how much of it we need to worry about tampering, because I think this Earth has cycles of heating and cooling, so that we may be in just another warming cycle, but we may prevent it being worse than it might have been if we did something to protect us from that. The other one is nuclear bombs. My experience, I was told about a recall I had during the second Berlin crisis. The only time this country's ever gone to DEFCON 2 with Russia. And I was in a special weapons squadron, 84Fs I mentioned. One squadron wing went to Etienne, France, deployed. And they, as well as all squadrons across Europe, as well as SAC, there are missile sites that are still active 24 hours a day. 2 officers in there, and each of those sites 24 hours a day in those sites, and nuclear subs that counting the multiple heads, I think, can launch over 80 atomic weapons at one time. And so we got all that out there, and I just suggest we ought to get rid of them all, like we did poisonous gas, because of the aftermath. Even if it's not so bad, we don't even survive. The cleanup is horrible to think about from a nuclear occasion. And so that's what I'm suggesting. I actually did detailed planning for a low-level run-in to drop a nuclear weapon on Vienna. And that was my target. And so we had people with I'm talking about fighter airplane. That was the weapon was be about 2.5 times Hiroshima size. It's about the biggest one we could carry and survive the delivery. Scary times, you know. You train, when you made your final run in, you turn the mirror, the rear view mirrors inward, and you wore an eye patch, black eye patch on one eye. So if the flash got your eye, you could at least have one survivable to still fly the airplane. So that I'm saying it's just horrible to think about the number of weapons we got now. I think we got 3,000 plus. Russia has. China's a little less, 22,000 range of weapons sitting around. And 12 countries, I think, in total have nuclear weapons now. So I think we just ought to get rid of them all. I mean, we did a pretty good job in World War II. We killed 60 million people collectively with conventional weapons. I mean, that ought to be enough, you'd think. And you don't have that radiation after effect. I know some of you have probably traveled around Europe. You notice some buildings that have different coloration and some of the building blocks and things. That's because we leveled some cities with carpet bombing in Germany, but yet they got rebuilt. If you do a nuclear thing, the example was that the recent thing, not recent, several years back, the Susumi hit Japan, that little coastal city. That's what 4 or 5 years ago, something like that now. Those people can't still go into that town without wearing all that protective suits. The guy at what's the place in Russia, Chernobyl, some of the Russian soldiers that recently said got sick just being around that place. The Russians overtook it in Ukraine. And I read one paper by a former long ago guy headed that facility. He claimed you would never be able to go into that facility for routinely without wearing some protective gear for 25,000 years. So that's the aftermath you worry about. So at any rate, like I said, I was hoping I didn't dampen people's feelings with that kind of ending of the book, but I felt that's the three major things the human race needs to worry about and be able to deal with if we're going to hang around.
At least two of them we have a little bit of control over.
What's that?
I said at least two of them we have a little bit of control over.
Right now, we couldn't. If I told you a meteorite was about to hit, what would you do?
Yeah, that we have no control over that. Things coming from space, they're coming from space.
we do have an right now a mission that's going out to Benui. I think it is. It's a bigger meteorite that has a satellite around it, rotating around it, and this is going to rendezvous and nudge the satellite with a certain energy level. So at least understand the physics then of how it changed its path. Because you got, when you go up, say you got a meteorite coming in and you're not going to do Hollywood and blow it apart with an atomic weapon or something. You're going to go up there and try to change its path to attach something to it and how much energy you want to put to change its path. We don't really know that, to do it, call it accurately. And so that's part of this mission that's en route right now. Unfortunately, I think it takes about a couple of years to get there and do this nudge. But we've done a lot. I don't know if that's in the book. We've done European Space Agency's rode alongside of a comet and shot pictures. We've both, I forget who else landed. Somebody landed on the meteorite. Unfortunately, they landed in the shade. So the vehicle didn't last long. Didn't have solar. We landed one and captured a sample, and it's on its way back now. Unfortunately, I know it's another year or so before it gets back to get the sample. So we can do we can get there and rendezvous. It's now, what do you do when you get there? It's sort of a little question. Scientifically, we don't have understood. So there's a lot of interesting challenges. I just am worried a little bit, not worried, but sad that I won't be around to take a part in some of the solutions. Because I'll be hit 89 in November. So I'm not going to be to the end of the show there. Probably it'll be our grandchildren, or my grandchildren. We'll be dealing with some of that.
But
you are part of
you're
a
part of
lot
it.
of inspiration to young people over the several decades now, and it's still happening with, like I said, our young kids now in Astro Camp. And I'm pretty sure you know Maria a lot. She always tells the story that the guy who is doing relativity space now was one of the Astro Campers, and now he's 3D printing rocket engines. So you just really don't know the inspiration that you have on these next generations and where they go from there. And what
I hope some of them will end up in the industry or in NASA and space. I really hope I inspire them to make use of their talent to the best. We're all different, and some are right side or left side of the brain types, and they wouldn't fit being an engineer. And so to be successful in life, you need to adapt the talent you've been naturally blessed with to marry with a profession that fits. And then you'll generally be happier getting to wherever you want to get, and with the hard work that may take to do it. And you'll be happier at work every day, not every day, but most days, and enjoy what you're doing and feel like you've had an accomplishment, whatever it be. I mean, it doesn't have to be space or engineering. It can be in any profession, but It's important for people to figure out. That's why in this country, I've always said, I wish we had a 2-year mandatory enlistment for particularly today for men and women, like Israel has. That would allow, and I hope they wouldn't get shot at, but at least it will allow them a maturing process. Where when they come through the 2 years, it'd probably be better suited to figure out what they really want to do with life. And I think there's a lot of children more today than before stumble around a bit before they really figure out where they belong. And a 2-year enlistment would be a very good investment for the country, even if they don't hopefully get to use them in that war scene, but just to get them straightened out on the right road to be productive citizens. I don't get much headway with that suggestion, by the way.
I don't know, sometimes it's done in other countries, and the opportunity to leave your hometown to see some of the world for a little bit.
Exactly.
And you're right, that's part of the
All of
maturation
that.
process.
All of that's a maturing process. Yeah.
All right, Lori, did you have another question? I noticed you're unmuted.
Oh, I could probably go on all night, but
Unfortunately, we don't have
I
a
just-
mic.
All right.
exactly. So very, very grateful for the opportunity.
Yeah,
Thank you.
let me show you one guy. He moved from his primary easy seat.
Oh, is he
okay.
there?
Oh, yeah.
Forget Tito. Yeah.
There he is.
Yeah. Yeah, he was in the easy chair next to me, and he moved over to his own bed, which is by the fireplace, which obviously is on
Is that a
his.
subtle hint?
So there's Tito. He's
I-
been fed, so he's been happily snoozing.
What was his name again?
His name is Tito. It was actually originally my granddaughter's dog, who got it in high school, and she was not keeping the dog up well, and the mother was fussing at her. So one Thanksgiving dinner, she showed up at the house for family dinner and asked Grandma and Papa if we would keep Tito for a while. So that was about 8 years ago, and we still have Tito. So at any rate, that's how we got Tito, and he's named after a Walt Disney character in a movie. One of the Walt Disney children's movies had a dog. I couldn't tell you which movie it was, but the dog was named Tito, Teetoh. So that's what the dog's name is.
I've seen him when you come to visit Infinity, and he doesn't like it when you're away.
Yeah, I had Tito's very familiar with Infinity. He's been there lots. Betsy, I don't know if you got to know overlap with Betsy. Betsy used to, because she always had that small dog. Hers has passed away recently, unfortunately. Betsy used to take care of Tito for me when I was at Infinity, because she had a small pet. Yeah, Betsy's gonna have a baby the first time.
Yeah, I've kind of been keeping up a little bit whenever she posts stuff about it.
Right. Yeah, Betsy was the executive director. John Wilson, who was there many years, is executive director, I guess you'd call it. He was the executive secretary for years. And so anyway, that's who we're talking about. But Infinity, like most museums, has gone through a rough period. With COVID hit all museums, I think even maybe worldwide probably, because attendance went to nothing. And of course, a lot of your funding, your revenue at museums is from attendance. And we actually shut down Infinity 6 months in 2020, from January 1 to June, because we couldn't make money, even not go in the hole, so to speak, and even trying to operate weekends. We went down to 2 days a week, and that didn't make it. So at any rate, most are all back up and I say reasonably healthy. We're still not back to 2019 fully from both attendance.
The best part is the school kids are back. We've got the schools back,
Right.
and they keep coming, all the children.
But it's been heard everywhere, even big ones. I mean, I keep in touch pretty well as a former admiral runs the San Diego Air and Space Museum. And they were struggling too, the same way. And they're in the center of a big population center, you know, San Diego, California.
Yeah.
And they had the same problems. So this COVID was messed up things in a lot of ways. And of course, unfortunately caused a lot of deaths.
But we've got our,
I just called, I'm trying to get my second booster. I've got the Moderna one is the one I got the 2 shots, and then I got a booster, and I've been along long enough time now. I'm going for the second booster. So I'll try to keep ahead of the bugs. The viruses is just too bad. They're not a little smarter than they are. They realize they depend on the host, so they shouldn't kill the host. They're not smart enough to know that, though, unfortunately.
yeah. Any other questions or anything? Yeah. Yeah, so we were talking about how the school group's coming back. Our summer crowds have come back this year too, so far. So it's looking like things are gonna start turning around soon, hopefully. For us.
All right, we got no more question. I guess we ought to call it a day, but I've enjoyed it. It's been great with all of y'all. Here we got Huntsville, we got Norway, and we got Canada, and we got old Gulfport, Mississippi.
Mississippi.
We used to be the old Commodores. When I was in high school in Biloxi, 12 miles away, the Biloxi Indians, that was the big rivalry, was those 2 high schools.
Yeah, that was my mother. She was one of the Gulfport Commodores.
Okay, yeah, and they got so bad, they had so many fights that for 2 years, I think they called off the games. They didn't play for 2 years. That was after I was gone. But that's how competitive it was.
Promotion. Now they're the admirals.
Yeah. But at any rate, that's one thing in my book, incidentally, for the first chapter, the growing up, hopefully gives a sense of how simple, in some respects, life was then to now. Particularly the freedom of being able to roam around all day, and not just Biloxi, which is a small town. I think it was 14,000 population when I was growing up. But even in Chicago, Illinois, I was a year in Chicago during the war in about 1943. And the same way there, I was not too far from downtown on Belmont at a school. I was 4th grade. And I was allowed to roam around free till dusk. Around that schoolyard was our playground, and I'd roam around the neighborhood. I bet you today in Chicago, if you were an adult, you wouldn't feel comfortable roaming around by yourself at night in that same part of the city.
I don't feel comfortable around here, but
Well,
I think my mother spent her childhood in a tree.
yeah, so things like that have changed, unfortunately, to the various reasons to where situations we had today. But it was a relaxed, fun time. Spent a lot of time in the water, obviously, we live in the Gulf. And good days. Cheap, I was rich being a paper boy, where I got out of 20 cents, I had to pay the company for the newspapers to deliver 6 days a week. 20 cents a week I charged the customer, and I had to pay the Daily Herald, Gulfport Daily Herald, Biloxi Daily Herald, 12 cents, and I got 8 cents for each customer, which I had 170 papers, customers. So I was making, essentially about $17 a week. And I was rich, and I started at 12 years old. because then I could get a Coca-Cola or a Pepsi-Cola for a nickel. You know, that the different times. Tootsie Rolls, I get Tootsie Rolls, the little bitty ones, for a penny. So anyway, different times. So anyway, I wish all of you well. I'm glad you tuned in, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation.